Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, where we've got the lovely Petrea King, who we're going to hear about some wonderful strategies that can help you with PTSD and suffering other traumas. My name's Yvette Adams, and I'll be your facilitator today. I want to first start with just a little bit of an opening about the Fearless event that's coming up, the conference, where you can come along and meet Petrea and lots of other people. So that's one of the reasons that we're doing these webinars, is to showcase the amazing people who will be featuring at these events. So I'll just make Petrea small, and we should be able to see my slides, which I'll just show a couple and then introduce Petrea. So yes, the Fearless Conference, maybe you've already heard about it, maybe you've already been on one of these webinars. It's happening the 21st to the 23rd of August at the Event Centre in Caloundra Sunshine Coast, which is where I'm based myself. I'll tell you more about the conference at the end of the webinar, but we really hope that you can make it. And this webinar has been brought to you today by Fearless, who are a charity for Australia and New Zealand to help people living with the long-term consequences of post-traumatic stress, often known as PTSD. And they want to help family members and friends affected by it in any way. They know people come from all walks of life, and there could be those living with the PTSD or those supporting them. And their work complements the work of other community-based organisations, who they're very hopeful will also become involved in this conference as well. So, without further ado, as I said, today we're talking to Petrea King. She says the director of Fearless. My apologies, Petrea. You should have the title of CEO of the Quest for Life Foundation, which is on the next bullet point down. That organisation was established in 1989. Then, of 1983, I believe it was, Petrea was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia and not expected to live. I don't probably need to go through this entire bio, because I'm sure Petrea is going to tell us about herself, but I'm very, very impressed with your bio, Petrea. You've had an incredible life, plenty of trauma, so clearly are in a great position to help not just one or two, but you've been helping tens of thousands of other people living with cancer, life-challenging illnesses, grief, loss, trauma, and tragedy. And unfortunately, there can be that in life. So what a wonderful thing it is that you do. Welcome to the webinar today, Petrea.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Now, I'm just going to get rid of my screen, and you can take the floor. So unfocus that. Stop sharing. Now it's all about you. Over to you.
Lovely. Oh, well, welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this conversation. I'm so impressed with the organisation Fearless, because one of the great strengths of that organisation is that it recognises that post-traumatic stress injuries, we tend to think of them more as injuries rather than disorders. Post-traumatic stress injuries can happen to any number of people, not just through war, not just through policing or being an emergency worker. It can happen in childhood through abuse and sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. It can happen through domestic violence. It can happen through motor vehicle accidents, sporting accidents. There are so many ways in which a person may find that they have injured their brain and nervous system. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I want to give you just a tiny bit of background, not so much my bio, because really what gives me a sense of great joy in my life is seeing other people realise that they have choice and that they're not a helpless victim of their circumstance. And this was something that I discovered for myself through my own suffering. And I know that even though most of us scrub up pretty well and we do our best to put on that face that we show to society that says, I'm coping, I'm okay. And in our family, I certainly came from a long line of people who coped. My mum is 97 and got all of her marbles, is in terrific health, but I've never seen her weep in all of the years that I've known her, which is 67 years of her 97. Because in our family, we had this very stoic kind of attitude where no matter what happened, we'd cope. And so we never did really any of the emotional, we didn't even have any emotional literacy really to be able to talk about what was happening. So I want to just give you the very bones of my story. Obviously, there's a big difference between the bones of a person's story and the flesh that hangs off those bones. It's in the flesh that all of the emotions, the reactions, the anguish, and that's often very privately felt. And sometimes we protect the world from what's really going on within ourselves. So my story was simply that I had a gorgeous brother whom I really worshipped and adored, and he was 22 months older than me. And before, Brendan probably invented ADHD 20 years before anyone knew what that was, and spent his childhood falling off the roof or out of windows or cutting himself or breaking bones. And I grew up trying to be as invisible as possible, to have absolutely no needs. And before we were both 10, Brendan told me that he knew he had to take his own life by the time he was 30. And for the first time, I felt like that's why I'm alive. I'm here to keep Brendan safe. And I remember thinking, I have to grow up really quickly so I can look after Brendan. And I promptly grew 23 centimetres in the next 15 months. That deranged the bone growth in my legs. I left school at 13, went into hospital, and had 12 major surgeries on my legs, where they cut my femurs and turned my lower legs out, and then cut my tibias and turned my lower legs in. So being in hospital for 3 years and having a lot of surgery, a lot of pain, was actually heaven in comparison to living with Brendan, whom I found very scary. I was then raped not long after I got out of hospital while I was in a back brace. It was actually in a house full of people, and if I'd have called out, someone would have come, but by then I just didn't have a voice. I was so used to, shh, be quiet, it'll be over soon, and so used to splitting off from my body and going elsewhere, that I didn't even think of it as rape. In fact, it was my fault because I didn't call out. I married some very odd people, one of whom was violent, and several were, not several marriages, but several relationships were quite abusive. I was quite crippled with arthritis from all of that surgery. Brendan was attempting suicide on and off throughout my teen years and then my 20s. He did finally succeed at 32 in Kathmandu. There was no body, no memorial, no funeral, no packing up of possessions. It was very hard to come to terms with the reality of his death when it was just a phone call. And not long after that, I moved to America with my husband to do our yoga and meditation teacher training. I was already a naturopath because I'd studied all of that stuff to see how I could help my own health. We'd only been in America for 4 weeks when I thought my husband had gone for a long walk, but he'd gone back to Australia, taking the money and leaving me with 2 small children out in the middle of nowhere. I was very grief-stricken still from my brother's suicide at this time, and I also felt terribly responsible for him. And just after that, I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, and I was relieved. I felt like life is too hard. I don't know how to do a good life. Maybe I can do a good death, but I don't know how to do a good life. It's a much longer story, obviously. I didn't die. I ended up in a little cave where St. Francis used to hole up outside of Assisi in Italy. And it was in that little cave where the combination of illness and exhaustion and grief finally led me to weeping, which I was terrified of doing because I thought if I start to cry, I might never stop. So I didn't obviously disintegrate into a million pieces. I actually ended up finding a good deal of peace. I found a peace that wasn't dependent on whether I stayed in my body or not. I knew I was not my body. I had one. I knew that I was not my chaotic brain, but I had one. I knew I was not my tumultuous feelings, but I sure and all had them. And it was a longer process of healing. And some of that will come out through this webinar, of some of the fundamental truths that most of us who've suffered significantly in our lives need to find a pathway to healing. And I guess the message of hope, given that this webinar is about hope, is how do we find a pathway to our own healing that resonates for us, that feels right for us. Because, you know, while in our programs here at Quest, and I'll tell you a little bit about Quest, we lay out a smorgasbord of education and information for people. Ultimately, each person has to pick and choose from resonate for me. What are the things that feel right for me? And then to put those into practice. So we don't pretend to know other people's answer. We know that you have your own best answer, but that sometimes we do need support and love and education so that we can begin to find a pathway to our own healing. So when I didn't die, time passed and I did find a good deal of peace, but I just felt I need to be with my children. They were only 4 and 7. I need to be with my family, with my loved ones, because I don't care if I go out of remission. I just need to be with the people that I love. And so I returned to Australia and I had all the blood tests again. And the doctor said, look, now you're in a remission and you weren't meant to have one. And I said, well, how long could this last? And they said, well, maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks. And I actually found that more difficult because by then I had my whole life all packed up in this little suitcase, all ready for the big trip, and the plane got cancelled. And I was faced with how do you unpack the suitcase? How do you live with any confidence in life when you know that at any moment I might go out of remission and have to leave? So I found that very, very challenging. After about 3 months, my mother said to me, have you thought of working, dear? And that was another huge shock to me because I thought, how can I start my life up again when at any moment I have to be ready to leave? And so as it happened, I rang Marcus Blackmore, the man from the vitamin company, because I'd met him during my naturopathic days. And I explained to Marcus my predicament. I'm a naturopath, a herbalist, a homeopath, a yoga meditation teacher, but I'm meant to be dead. I'm not. The doctors still say I'm going to die. I don't know what to do. And it was Marcus who said, forget what the doctor said, just go into practice. And I did so very reluctantly as a naturopath. I'd found that whole experience of confronting my own mortality, confronting the grief around my brother and that terrible sense of responsibility I carried for his mental health. I found all of that experience had been such an incredibly intense experience, and I wasn't sure that being a naturopath really was what I wanted to do. However, I launched into a practice, mostly because Marcus told me to. He introduced me to a doctor in Mossman who was looking for a naturopath to share his practice with. And within the first 2 weeks, the first woman with cancer came in, breast cancer. The day after, the first person with AIDS came in. And my question to people has always been, what is it that stands in the way of you being at peace? And so some 120,000 conversations later now with many people, and in studying many different pathways to healing over that time, and having loved so many people who are facing some kind of major crisis in their life. Initially, it was around cancer and HIV, people confronting their mortality, but those people also brought stories of domestic violence, of sexual abuse, of childhood trauma, of sexual assault, of feeling very poor self-esteem, of having their relationships in tatters, of all of the things that I too had experienced. And it's not that we ever know what it's like for another person. It's never helpful to say to someone, I know exactly how you feel. You have no idea how another person feels, but you might know what that place of despair, that place of anguish, that place of hopelessness, powerlessness, helplessness, you might know what that space is for you. And it makes you a better companion to be with other people who are just venturing into that territory. And so I've always found this work with people a tremendous privilege to be invited into some of the most vulnerable and painful parts of a person's life. And knowing that I can't fix it, I can't change it, I can't make it better. but we can be good companions to one another as we find a pathway to healing. Now, I know many people who've been diagnosed with PTSD and complex PTSD have been told that you won't actually get any better than this, that this is something you're going to have to learn to live with. And I want you to know that's not true. I've seen so many people heal from the trauma that they've experienced. And, you know, we need to spread this message of hope, that you are not a helpless victim of your circumstance. You're a creative human who can make new choices, go in new directions, and that there is a pathway to your own healing. I'm a great believer, though, that it's not enough for us to hope that things are going to get better. Hope has to be underpinned by legs. It has to have effort underpinned by that hope so that we can move forward in a direction that's going to actually lead us into some positive healing in our life. It's not enough to hope that things are going to get better. And that's why Fearless and Quest and these organisations that bring into the public arena these conversations that are so important to be had, because so often people tend to isolate themselves, to withdraw from people, because some people almost feel like people would be better off not having me in their life. And that is so not the case. I imagine if we've got some 59 people with us on this webinar, I imagine some of you have thought about suicide, have contemplated suicide, and I get that. But having been someone who loved and lost someone through suicide, I know that that thought that sometimes people have of they'll all be better off without me is so, so wrong, because those of us who live with the heartache of having lost someone through suicide, we would do anything to have that person be well, to give them whatever love and support that we possibly can to have them be well. So please know that there is not just hope for a full recovery. There is now good information that's coming out on a daily basis about how the brain and nervous system can be healed. What people often don't understand is that when there are medical discoveries, it usually takes a generation or at least 15 to 20 years before that research is actually introduced into how we treat people. So at the moment, we treat people in a very kind of perfunctory way, you know, that this disease equals this remedy. And PTSD or a post-traumatic stress injury is something that we need to really engage with people. We need to listen to them. We need to provide a nurturing, safe, supportive environment in which that person can begin to find their pathway into healing. But healing is definitely possible. Now, we have a program at Quest called Moving Beyond Trauma, and I want to tell you just a little about how that came into being. Some years ago, we had a wonderful police officer who some of you perhaps know, Esther Mackay, who's written a lot of books. She was a forensic police officer for 15 years before she developed a post-traumatic stress injury. And Esther came on a program with us in 2012, and on that program I said to her, I so wish that we could provide a program for police and emergency workers and veterans and others who've experienced a traumatic event in their life and who are really suffering from the consequences. And Esther had found through the Healing Your Life program more practical information, education and benefit and practical skills and tools and strategies to put into place, far more so than when she'd had her hospitalizations. Now, I'm not against hospitals. Sometimes that's exactly the place that we need to be. I'm also just a great believer in educating people and providing that safe and nurturing environment in which people can begin to find their own best answers so that they can begin to heal themselves as well as utilise whatever they may be utilising as far as medication and other therapies might be concerned. So I said to Esther, I would so love to create this program, and I've written to the police commissioner, but I didn't get a response. Anyway, ultimately, we had a number of people with a post-traumatic stress injury on our programs, and so we could see that there was this huge need for a program that was specific for them. So we actually, the Quest for Life Foundation employed Esther for a year, and we worked together to really look at all of the aspects of the program so that we could provide a really effective program that would help people to begin that recovery process. Now, that program started in 2016, and we've had about 80 police and about 40 veterans on that program over the last 3 years, along with many, many other people from those different backgrounds of sexual assault or abuse in childhood, other traumas that happened in childhood, domestic violence, motor vehicle accidents, sporting accidents, all of these things. And one of the things that we found so interesting and amazing was that it was actually having the mixture of stories in the room that was so valuable. Because when a veteran hears that someone who was sexually abused in their childhood is hypervigilant, very anxious, very isolated, withdrawn, depressed, their relationships are in tatters, perhaps they're abusing drugs or alcohol, they're very reactive and hyper aroused all of the time. When a veteran heard that those were the symptoms someone who'd had sexual assault or abuse in their childhood was experiencing exactly the same symptoms that the veteran was experiencing. And likewise, the person who was abused in their childhood heard from a veteran, gosh, what you're experiencing, that's exactly what I'm experiencing. And so what we found happened very quickly was that the group recognizes we've all suffered a trauma to our brain and nervous system, rather than the story of how that trauma came about. And it was able to shift people from the story to recognizing we've all been injured in a very different way, but the consequences of that injury are showing up in identical ways. Now, just the same as if you had a broken arm, you wouldn't expect to carry a bucket of water. Likewise, when you've suffered a trauma to your brain and nervous system, you can't expect for your body and your brain to function normally. It needs a safe environment, just the same as a broken arm would need a safe environment of a plaster perhaps. It might even need resetting in some way. You have to create the environment in which the body's innate knowledge and wisdom about how to heal, because frankly, it's not the doctor that heals your broken arm, it's your body that heals that. But you may need a cast, you may need even surgery to get those bones straight or a plate put in. You create the environment in which that healing can take place, and then your body begins that healing process. So we know that when you put your brain and your nervous system into an environment in which healing can take place, your brain and body begins to produce the neurochemistry, the chemistry in your brain and in your gut, because next to your brain, your gut secretes the most neurotransmitters, which is the chemistry of your emotions. So that's why we say, oh, I've had a gut feel, I've had a gut full. That person causes me to go to the bathroom more frequently than I used to. It's because in our gut, in fact, you have 1.5 kilos of bacteria in your gut. Everyone does. And your microbiome, this community of bacteria in your gut, they're the ones who are busy secreting a lot of the neurochemistry that you're experiencing. And so we know, for instance, that a lot of this gut bacteria makes serotonin. And serotonin is one of those neurotransmitters that makes you feel good, makes you feel happy. But if you've got a not so good microbiome because your nutrition is not so good, and then you may not be secreting the serotonin that you need to in your system. Because I know when you feel depressed, when you feel helpless, when you feel hopeless, when you feel powerless, you're unlikely to think, oh, I'm going to make myself a really lovely salad. It's more likely we'll go for the pies and the chips. We're likely to go to food that probably isn't as nutritious for your body when it's busy doing its best to heal. So we can educate people, though, about this is the kind of nutrition that your microbiome will really flourish so that you've got loads of energy and so that your body is beginning to produce that neurochemistry that can actually heal the physical trauma that your brain and your nervous system has experienced. So you're not your brain, you have a brain. And if yours has become traumatized, then you do need to give yourself the space and the time to get educated about what are the things that heal the brain and nervous system when it's experienced a trauma. Now, one of the things that is very helpful for people when they've had a trauma to the brain and nervous system is to get that education about how to look after your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, whatever that is for you, and it'll be different for all of us. So you're not your body, but you do have one, and you need to nourish it appropriately. That means you need to eat and put onto your body the things that actually belong there. Now, this could be a whole day's lecture, so I won't bore you to sobs with it. But just remember slow food. That's what human beings have been eating for millennia. Seasonal, because the food that's in season has the most vibrant nutrition in it. But bear in mind, a lot of the time now, the food that's in the supermarket isn't seasonal. It's coming from all over the world. So eat the food that's in season. Now, the best place to know that's out of your own back garden. If you can grow anything, that's a great idea. You'll definitely know what's seasonal. Seasonal too means allowing the fruit and veg to actually ripen on the plant. Most nutrition comes into food in the last 48 hours of ripening. Most food is picked long before that last 48 hours. So we want to pick food that's in season, that has ripened, if possible, on the vine. Now, we know that, or on the plant, or on the tree. We know that best, of course, if it's in our own back garden. But I know that's not always easy to achieve for everyone. So what we're eating is really important. What we're putting onto our body is equally important, because 60% of what you put onto your body is absorbed into your body. So you want no chemicals in those things that you're putting onto your body. Now, the average US baby born today has up to 200 persistent chemicals in its cord blood when it arrives here. So these chemicals, we know, often interfere with neurological functioning. So it's a good idea to get as many of these chemicals out of your environment, out of your personal care products, out of the food that you're eating, out of your cleaning cupboards, out of your garden shed, so that you have as few chemicals that don't belong in your body in your environment. So you need to nourish your body appropriately. You need to rest your body. And of course, so many people with a post-traumatic stress injury have great difficulty in switching off their brain at night so that they can find deep, restful sleep. Many people too are highly disturbed by flashbacks, nightmares. And so we need to get educated about how am I going to create a safe environment in which I can learn to switch off the mad monkey. The Indians describe the mind as a wild drunk monkey swinging through treetops. So how am I going to put that monkey on the leash because I don't want it running the show. Sorry, I've got a hair in my eye. So how am I going to tame that mad monkey so that I can use my brain and not be used by my brain? So how do I bring my brain to rest? One of the most effective ways of doing that is simply to come to your senses. That's what we say to people when they're having a panic attack. Come to your senses. And we say that for a really good reason. Your body is always in the present moment. Your brain has a tendency to project into the future your worries, your fears, your anxieties, all the things that might happen, could happen, probably won't happen. Or the brain is busy telling us stories about the past, where we rehash memories, we revisit, we resent, we blame, we shame about things in the past. And I should say too, some people think that a post-traumatic stress injury is some flaw in their character. Some personality trait that they have that, if they'd have been strong enough, if they'd have been more resilient, if they'd been more capable, if they'd been a bit tougher, they wouldn't have developed a PTSI. That's really not the truth at all. Everyone is susceptible to having this as an injury, as they are to any other kind of injury. We know that some people have a greater tendency towards developing a post-traumatic stress injury, particularly if there was trauma in their childhood or other traumas along the way. That can certainly sensitize our system, but we can desensitize our system as well. So learning to switch off the brain, because you're not your brain, you have a brain, and you need to use your brain, not be used by it. And you see, your brain, if it's unmanaged, can create a great deal of suffering for you in your life, which I'm sure you've already discovered. You're not your brain, though. You have a brain, and you're meant to quieten it down. When the brain is fully focused in the present moment by coming to your senses, so even while you're listening to me, you can be aware of your physical posture, sitting or lying down, however you might be at the moment. You can be aware of how the chair or the mattress supports your body right now. You can be aware of the weight of your body, the touch of your clothing against your skin. Perhaps you can feel its texture, the temperature that your clothing helps create. Perhaps you can feel the way your clothing is moving against your skin as you breathe. You might notice if you've got any taste in your mouth, and notice how your tongue and your nose work in concert to establish the taste. Maybe there's an aroma in the air, and you can notice how your nostrils savor the air to extract the aroma. You can notice what falls within your gaze if you're looking at the screen of the computer, or you can close your eyes and see what's there behind closed eyes. You can listen to the sounds within the room that you're in, but also let your listening run right out till you hear the sun shining. You see, if you become fully present in this moment, aware of your weight, your posture, the touch, the taste, the smell, the sight, all of the sounds within and outside this space, you actually quieten down all of the activity in the brain. And when the brain begins to quieten down, it begins to secrete some really valuable neurochemistry. We secrete chemicals like oxytocin, serotonin. We begin to secrete a wonderful little neurotransmitter called Ananda Mind. Ananda is a Sanskrit word meaning bliss. It's literally known as the bliss hormone. And when we laugh, when we feel a sense of joy, of contentment in our life, we secrete anandamide. And one of the amazing things that anandamide does Well, two things. One, it tells every cell of your body to optimize its performance. It virtually, Ananda Mind as a neurotransmitter, locks onto the receptor site on the surface of every cell of your body. And it tells that cell, you be a fabulous lung cell, liver cell, brain cell, bone cell. She's doing exactly what she came to the planet to do. But if we're feeling anxious, hypervigilant, if our brain is projecting our worries, our fears, what if I never get better? What if it gets worse than this? What if the anxiety never lifts? Or we go into going over the trauma of the past, over and over the trauma, and the shame of why did I develop this, and I should have been better, and why this and why that. Not only does your brain get preoccupied with the future or the past, you actually secrete a neurochemistry in accordance with wherever your brain has taken you, into fretting, fearing, worrying, anxiety, into resenting, blaming, shaming, feeling embittered about the past. And when you anchor the brain into the present moment, by coming to your senses constantly. Not 5 minutes would ever go past in my life that I'm not coming to my senses. It's how I keep my brain fully focused in the present moment. And you see, when you've suffered a traumatic injury, it affects the deepest part of your most primitive part of the brain. That limbic and amygdala and the hippocampus get into this reactive loop where we end up saying and doing things automatically with no filter, no consideration. A reaction is always in the body. A response takes us into new territory. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So when you quieten down your brain and you keep it in your service, not running the show, it begins to do this self-healing by producing different neurochemistry from fretting, fearing, where your cortisol levels go up. And you see your hippocampus, which is responsible for laying down memory, long-term memory, short-term memory, it is involved with that as well. Your hippocampus, right at the base of your brain, is very rich in cortisol receptor sites. And cortisol, when you're reacting to something, when you're feeling stressed, when you're hypervigilant, when you're anxious, up go your cortisol levels. They lock onto the receptor sites and they're interfering with your ability to lay down memory, learning. So you may find that you can read a paragraph and at the end of the paragraph it's like, geez, what did I just read? And you have to read it again to be able to kind of get it in there. If your cortisol levels are high, you'll find it very difficult to lay down long-term memory. So we need to quieten down the brain. Now, some people do this through molting. Some people do this through meditation, which is the formal practice of sitting there and watching the activity that's going on in your brain and in your body. And some people do it through mindfulness. And mindfulness is bringing all of your awareness into this present moment by staying connected to your senses. So when you're washing the dishes, you just wash the dishes and keep your brain quiet, feeling the warmth, hearing the popping of the bubbles, feeling the actions of your hands, watching the mystery of how your hands do that. Amazing, even just washing your hands, just being fully present and watching how marvelous it is that your hands know how to wash themselves. When you do any of those little activities that might sound so simple, but what you're doing is entraining the brain, quietening down the activity in the brain. And when the brain is quiet, you have access to some really phenomenal qualities: insight, intuition, wisdom, humor, spontaneity, creativity, and compassion. See, we only have access to those qualities if we keep the brain fully focused in the present moment. And so there are many ways, and certainly on our programs we teach many ways, either getting in touch with the breath, because that's something that's happening all of the time. Maybe just coming back to the sensations of the breath flowing in and out of your body, or the rising and falling of your belly, or the difference in temperature between the inward and outward breath as the air is warmed by your body. So if you keep your brain fully focused in the present moment, and that might be through any number of activities. You know, I don't know about you, but I'm on a Google alert for the research about what's helpful for people when they've suffered a post-traumatic stress injury. And every day it comes in through my inbox. And what it says is breath work, meditation, mindfulness, horse riding, dolphin therapy, canine therapy, equine therapy, painting. And you see all of these activities bring the brain into a focused state. You know, when you're cantering on the back of a horse, you're not thinking about the future, you're not thinking about the past. It's a full-on sensory, present time experience. When you're painting, when you're digging in the garden, when you're walking a labyrinth, when you're looking into the eye of a dolphin, a whale, when you have the company of a dog and your hands in that soft fur. You see, these are all sensory experiences that bring us into the present moment. And that's where your brain begins to do its healing. So we talk a lot in our Moving Beyond Trauma program about what are some of these activities that help us to fully focus the brain in the present moment. I also talked about the difference between a reaction and a response, and that's a huge part of our program as well. A reaction is always in the body. If you think about a time when you were really reacting to someone or to something, where did you feel it in your body? It was probably in the stomach for some. Maybe the chest felt tight, or your heart rate increased, or your breathing changed and became much lighter, or you tensed up your jaw, or you tensed up your shoulders, your neck. You held tension in your body. Maybe your hands went into fists or began to get sweaty palms, or you went shaky in the legs. That's a reactivation of a physiology that you've experienced before that you live again in the present moment. And for many people, when you ask them, when you're in the midst of a reaction, how old do you feel? And most people say, oh, I feel like I'm a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old, out of my depth. And what you're literally doing is reactivating the physiology of either that little child or the trauma that you experienced. That feeling comes up in your body and you live it again in the present moment. So you don't want to speak from that. You don't want to act from that, because a reaction has no consideration involved in it. It's out of our mouth, out of our fist, out of the slammed door, out of the slammed cup on the table, out of that harsh word, out of that unconscious action where sometimes we end up hurting ourselves or others or furniture. A response is really different. Now, reaction and response are often used interchangeably in the media. And, you know, we hear America responded this way, reacted this way. I'd suggest use these words really appropriately from now on. A reaction is a reactivation of the past that we live again in the present. A response takes us into new territory. A response is really different for everyone, which is why each one of us needs to find our own pathway. A response could be, thank you so much for asking me. I'm fully committed at present. It could be, you and I need to have this really difficult conversation that we both keep avoiding. An appropriate response could be, I need to find a way of shutting off my mind at night so I can get some sleep. An appropriate response could be, I need to improve my nutrition. A reaction repeats what we've done before. A response takes us into new territory. So if you can become aware of where do you react in your body, and your job is to never speak from it, never act from it, but to become aware of it. Oh, there it is. There it goes in my tummy. My heart rate's increased. My breathing's changed. Oh, I've tensed up my jaw. I don't want to speak from this. I don't want to act from this, because I may say and do something I will later regret. You see, the inability to discern between a reaction and a response is what lies behind domestic violence and road rage and a lot of murders, not premeditated ones, but a lot of, those moments where we have a feeling, we're overwhelmed with the feeling and we just act from it, instead of having the ability to witness ourselves having that feeling and choosing not to speak it, not to act it out. We might need to go and punch the heck out of a punching bag, but let not that be a person. We may need to get the energy of what we're feeling moving, but we don't want to speak from it. We don't want to act from it in an unconscious, unaware way. So a reaction is in the body and it's automatic. A response requires consideration. If you got nothing out of this webinar today, other than the determination to become aware of where you react in your body and choose never to speak nor act from it again, it'll change your life. And it takes awareness though, doesn't it? That's the thing. We have to become aware. I'm not my body, but I have one. I need to nourish it appropriately. I need to rest it. So we talk about sleep and how to switch off your mind at night, how to create an environment so that restful sleep can come. You need to exercise your body. It's one of the most effective ways of getting the neurochemistry of cortisol and stress out of your body is to actually go run it, go punch it, go do something to get the energy of that moving so it doesn't stay stuck in your body where it's going to harm you. It's certainly going to lock onto your hippocampus, which won't help you long term. So if you think about the word reaction, and if you were to move the C back to the beginning of the word, you're back into creation. We're always either in the present moment or we're reactivating the past and living it again in the present moment. Now, we don't say to people, take reactability for your life. We say, take responsibility, your ability to respond to the life that you're having. So you may need to weep about it, rail about it, scream about it, write about it, talk about it, till you can get to a place where that did happen and it happened to me. And given I'm a woman, a man in this circumstance, what's an appropriate response? Not a reaction. A reaction will just keep you trapped and stuck in the same place, doing the same thing over and over again. We've all had that experience with our partner of having the same conversation over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And Einstein these days is blamed for everything, but Einstein was meant to have said that's the definition of madness, to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. When, of course, what we find is the same thing happens over and over and over again. We reactivate the same conversation over and over again. A response takes us into new territory. So some of the things also that we do on our program is look at the language of reaction. Because when we're reacting, there's a little group of words that we say, I can't, I should, I'll try, You never, you always. If only. That can drive you nuts. If only. Along with what if. There's a big difference between I can't have that conversation with my father than, I choose not to have that conversation with my father. Or I choose to have that conversation. And given I'm making that choice, then how will I create an environment where I feel safe to have that conversation and remain in my adult? So these are some of the things that we can begin if we change our language to, instead of I can't, I choose to, I choose not to, I will, I won't, I've decided to, I've decided not to, but not I can't. I should is generally the echo of the nuns or our parents, someone else who's got an agenda for us, but does it feel right for us? So if we change our language, we clean up a great deal of the reactions in our life. So I know that we're getting towards the end of our time together. And I guess the things that are so important to me are to know that you're not alone. There are many people who've walked a similar path and who've suffered a traumatic injury to the brain and their nervous system. And don't be so hard on yourself that you should be able to cope better. If you had a broken arm, you'd be sympathetic to yourself. You'd ensure that you could find the right environment to make sure that this can heal. So don't be so hard on yourself when you've suffered a traumatic injury to your brain and nervous system. And maybe find a community of people, which is why this conference is so important in August. A conference that will bring together people who've experienced a post-traumatic stress injury, as well as a lot of people who work with them, to really begin to unpack some of this conversation that we need to have, because PTSIs are very, very common in our community, in our families, in our loved ones. And if we understand better how the brain functions, how it gets traumatized, and how we can heal it again, then we'll have gone a long way towards creating a lot of much more peace and good health in ourselves, in our families, in our communities. I really encourage you to come to this event in August. Get yourself there. If you want to go there and you can't figure out how, just dream your biggest dream anyway, because without a dream, nothing happens. And if you decide, no, you see, change won't happen until you get to a place where you say, that's it, something has to change, and it's me. I can't change what happened. You can't change whatever the cause was for the trauma you experienced. You surely can change how you're going to respond to the fact that you have had this trauma. And you can change the way you see this event so that it doesn't cripple you for the rest of time. I do hope you'll join us. And I do hope that you'll reach out for support and education and help, because there's a great deal of it out there now to assist you to make that return journey back home to your own good health, your own good physical health, your own good mental health. And I would encourage those particularly who are feeling isolated and alone with their experience, reach out for support. You'll find it there. And if you're a police officer or you're covered under a workers' compensation claim, your insurer will happily pay for you to come and attend a program here, because they know the results that people get well, and that they can sometimes get back to work or train into other careers or find peace and meaning in their life. So DVA will pay for you to come if you're a veteran. The insurers will certainly pay for you. Victims of crime, Police Legacy. There are many organisations who recognise there is a path to healing, and there are programs now that can help you to find that pathway back home to your own self. I do hope you'll join us in August. It's only a few weeks away now, and I'm very much looking forward to meeting any of you there. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to meeting you in August. And I imagine Yvette might come back with us now just to tell you a few more details about the conference so that we can make sure that you can join us then.
Indeed, Victoria. Thank you very much for an amazing session. I felt like, I don't know if the other guests did the same, a bit of an emotional journey. I did tear up at the start with your story, and you obviously have experienced an enormous amount of trauma, but what a wonderful thing you've done to turn that life around and now be gifting everyone with your experiences and knowledge to help them recover and feel that sense of hope. So thank you so much for your time today, and we're super
Very
excited
welcome.
having you at the conference. Now, everybody, I don't know if you've been like me, but almost probably in so much awe that you've been silenced and got a lot of things going in the mind, perhaps. But feel free to drop us a chat, and we'll certainly, Petrea could maybe take a few minutes to answer questions. In the meantime, I will just finish off with a few slides that I'd like you to know about how to come to the conference, the details of the conference. So just to make sure that you have those at hand. So I'll just reduce Petrea's lovely face there for a moment, and we'll go into that. So as Petrea said, it's going to be a wonderful conference, and there are ways to get there, even if it seems a little bit out of reach. So of course we're saying register now, secure that spot, grab it early. And there's all sorts of activities and programs around the conference, and it's very flexible. So you can come for the full time, which we'd love you to, 21st to the 23rd. There's a full program on this website, fearlessconference.org.au, where you can find out all the different parts, or you might choose to just come to a dinner, or there's a walking activity and things like that. I do also want to make sure you're all aware that we've now got a call for papers out, and this goes for the next couple of weeks until around mid-July. There's a very big part on the front of the website saying to go to this URL or website address, so you can write that down. It's fearlessconference.org.au/call-for-papers, and you can submit an abstract with evidence-based research or programs relating to PTSD. Perhaps you've had some experiences, you have something to contribute to the conversation, then the Fearless team very much like to hear from you. So I hope some of you will take that opportunity. I know certainly people have been reaching out on social media saying, can they? And we're pleased to now be able to say, yes, you can. We'd love to hear from you. Submit your call papers. I mean, Petrea is incredible, as you've just seen, but she is one of many amazing speakers who will be at the conference. So there she is, top left, sort of creeping up over her face, which is very cute. And there's all these other wonderful speakers going to be there. So the team at Fearless have been adding to the website regularly lately. If you haven't been on the website for a while, go back on. So go under the conference menu and then to speakers. And for each of these, you can click on them, read about them, read what they'll be talking about. And they're all so different. They've all got these different experiences and perspectives and value to add to this conversation. So we strongly encourage you to get on there. One I'll highlight on the screen there, apart from, of course, Petrea, who's just spoken, is Natasha Ixelby. So she was in the I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of There TV show and has had a long career as a reporter, where she's been in Afghanistan and seen people experiencing trauma. So a completely different perspective again. And Fearless are very excited to now have her as an official ambassador for Fearless, which is a really wonderful thing for the organisation. And many others, I can't go into all of them now in the interest of time, because I want to make sure you've got the opportunity to ask questions. But here's another screen, and there's more. This is just a little snapshot. So I really hope after the webinar, you'll go and jump on the website and have a look at the full speaker list. As I said, the programs on the website, so you can find out about what's happening on day 1, day 2, and day 3. There's panel discussions, there's dinners, there's drinks, there's all sorts of things to get involved in. Come for one day or come for the whole lot, as I said. In case you're not familiar with it, this is where I live. We're very close to. It's pretty attractive on a weather like this in the winter. And August, let's face it, will still probably be quite cold in the southern parts of Australia. I have to admit it's raining today. It doesn't actually look like this today, but here's hoping come August you'll have those beautiful blue skies and clear water So you can get a lot of rest and relaxation in between this wonderful conference. It really is a great place to come and visit. Accessible via Maroochydore Airport, which is expanding, and Brisbane Airport, or you could drive from wherever you are or train. There's many options to get here. Here's the tickets. These are on the website as well, broken down into different rates depending on what you do. Fearless recognise that students might want to come and might not quite have the budget, so they've given a different price point for them. You can do a group rate and get some really nice savings if you were to come with a bunch of your employees. There's even a community rate that you do have to apply for. There's a limited number of those available, and you have to sort of put your case across as to why you might be eligible for that. So very affordable conference if you compare it to anything else, and a lot of value to be had by coming along. We'd love to see you at the conference, but in the lead up, we'd love you to join the conversation. There's already a lot of conversation happening on all of the social channels. So whether you're into Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, or you like to watch YouTube clips, all of these webinars we record end up on the Fearless YouTube channel. And there's also each of the directors talking about their experiences with PTSD and why they, on a volunteer basis, are on the board of Fearless. So there's some wonderful people involved, and you can read or watch more about them on the YouTube channel. The link, if you can't quite grab this, is all on the website as well, and as are the latest feeds, so you can see what's being said on the conversation and just observe or choose to participate at any time if you would like to. So the early bird tickets are actually passed now. Those tickets I just showed you are the rates that are going now. So I'll just stop sharing my screen and we'll see if we've had any questions come in. What have we got? Lisa, thank you so much. Lisa said, thank you so much, Petrea. You're an amazing person. My sister with chronic PTSD lives with me. Would love to see her attend your workshop. We'll make inquiries. So that's great.
Always welcome.
Any other questions? Anybody? It's such an amazing opportunity having Petrea on the line. We'd really like you to utilise the opportunity, but if not, perhaps you're a bit like me and just a bit in awe of what an amazing person Petrea is, and more to share, I'm sure, at the conference. What will you share at the conference, Petrea?
Well, some of what we were talking about this morning, that there is a pathway to healing, and that we know so much more now about the brain and body, and that this is an injury, and how we can heal that. So, I think so many people feel so stuck and so overwhelmed by their experience that I know it's hard to have hope. But there is good reason to hope. And as I said, hope needs to be underpinned by effort. And that's why I'm a great believer in we need to come together, support one another. We're busy building accommodation, so people after the 5-day program can actually be here for 4 weeks, where they put into practice everything that they've learned in the 5-day program about neuroplasticity and epigenetics, because we know that if people can put this into practice on a daily basis in a supportive, nurturing environment, I know that they will heal. So those are some of the things that we'll be talking about at the conference.
Wonderful. And I do have a question here too from Sarah, who asks, how do you heal when trauma is ongoing with battles with Centrelink to be treated as a human?
Yes. Isn't that a challenge? Because when you've got an amorphous body that you have to deal with, but of course when you bring your anger or your frustration or your anxiety or anything to that encounter with Centrelink, you're probably going to be met with that as well. So you being in that calm, clear space where you can respond appropriately without the heat of whatever it is that you're feeling is a skill that you can begin to develop, and you may actually find a way of progressing in a more effective way than seeing them stuck in that role of always being your worst enemy. Sometimes taking someone else with you, sometimes putting things into writing rather than speaking. If you feel that you're going to get emotionally upset when you're in that environment, maybe spending some time and writing down the points so that it's really clear and dispassionate, and then have someone with you that can help you to remain in your kind of adult to be able to share this information with them. But yes, there are many people who find dealing with government bodies and other bodies very challenging.
Mm. I think we've started something, Petrea. It's always the way. We ask one and then usually people get to ask another. We have a question from Alana saying, do you have any suggestions to reduce nightmares?
Yes, absolutely. Look, our hearts really go out to you, because I know they can be so exhausting and so distressing. And so we do a lot around sleep hygiene. In that hour before you go to bed, maybe have a bath, wash off the day, or a shower, and just wash off the day. Make sure your bedroom's in a clean and orderly state. Make sure that you're sleeping in natural fibres. Maybe use a practice that talks you through a progressive relaxation, so that when you go to sleep, you'll fall straight into your deep sleep level, which normally takes you 5 hours to access. And indeed, some people don't even have 5 hours before they're awake because of nightmares, or they need to go to the bathroom, or whatever it might be. So yes, creating an environment in which the brain can begin to find some rest and settle itself, maybe using a practice that can help talk you through a progressive relaxation. Then if you do wake up during the night, go to the bathroom, go back to bed, before the mad monkey starts up in your brain, that's a good time to put on that practice again and go through that progressive relaxation, so that you go back into your deep sleep level, where you bypass that dreaming, and in time creating that safe environment, so that if you're beginning to deal with the emotional issues during the day, you'll find that you begin to have less nightmares at night. But it's a journey, and I'm not pretending. We try and make this as simple as possible, but simple's not easy, and we know it does take effort for people to put these things into practice in order for them to really experience the benefits from it.
Mm, absolutely. I love that you give some of these things labels, like the mad monkeys. I'm sure that's helpful to know that's what you call it, and they've got mad monkeys, and I now know a mechanism to try and cope with them. So that's a wonderful tool in itself. In the interest of time, Petrea, there's 2 more questions, so I might ask them and just say, if you're really, really dying to ask something, please type it out fast, and we'll make that the last question after that. So Mel has asked, may I ask, do you see that mindfulness and yoga practitioners treating PTSD need trauma-sensitive mindfulness and yoga training before stepping into helping PTSD sufferers?
Yes. The simple answer is yes, because, for instance, there are some yoga postures that open your body right up, and if you've been sexually assaulted or had sexual abuse, that may feel really uncomfortable for you. So it's important to work with a teacher who knows about trauma and trauma-informed care, so that you don't put people into a vulnerable state. You can do yoga in the chair. You always want people to feel like they're in charge of their own experience, not something that you're inflicting upon them. So yes, working with trauma-informed and educated people is very important. All of our psychologists and therapists and facilitators and counsellors and so on have all had that training, so that they know how to produce trauma-informed care.
I'd have to agree with that. I can understand why that would be needed. Mel also said, and I think it's a great question though, so worth sharing, how much do you think compassion and forgiveness help sufferers recover from PTSD cycle of shame or blame?
That's a 5-day workshop. We need to have compassion for ourselves, obviously, when we've been through such a trauma. Forgiveness is a huge topic, and one that is very hard to cover in a couple of minutes. But forgiveness is never, ever, ever about condoning. It's not about saying that what happened was okay. It was not okay, but it did happen. So forgiveness is an inner process whereby we liberate ourselves from the consequences of having felt wounded in the past. So we no longer reactivate in the present, as if we're still carrying any wound from our past. So it's not to condone what happened, but when you're able to forgive, and there are two statements that I think are really useful to remember. Forgiveness doesn't make them right, but it does set you free. And the other one is forgiveness is giving up all hopes for a better past. It just is. We might have to weep about it, write about it, scream about it, write about it, talk about it, until we can say, yeah, that happened, and it happened to me. But it's now in my story, not something that continues to gnaw away at me in the present. So I have a story, but I don't live in the midst of that story. So forgiveness doesn't even need to involve the other person or the situation. It's an inner process whereby we liberate ourselves from the consequences of having felt wounded in the past. And when we liberate ourselves, we no longer react in the present as if we're still carrying any wound from our history. So it's never about condoning. It's not about saying what happened was okay. It was not okay, but it did happen. And we want to have a story, not live in the midst of that story all of the time. And I think the first step, if forgiveness is a bridge too far, as I can imagine it could be for a lot of people, acceptance is the first toe in the water. I accept that this thing did happen, and it did happen to me. That's the very first step, to recognise this terrible, appalling, unexpected, unthinkable, unimaginable, inappropriate, violent, dreadful, awful, unlawful thing happened, and it happened to me. But now I have a story about that, and I'm not living in the midst of that story. That's really the essence of forgiveness. It doesn't mean that this person or situation is fully resolved and becomes your new best friend. But it does set you free, and that's a huge blessing. Imagine being able to look the perpetrator in the eye and say nothing that you could do or say has any impact on me. To feel like that, isn't that a liberation? Rather than my experience is dependent on how the world treats me, then I could be in tricky territory.
Yeah, that's right. Last question. I did offer it, so we better complete.
That's okay.
Final question is Alana saying, you talk a lot about the mad monkey or mind racing. I don't experience that. I was told I've pushed the trauma so far down, it's now stuck in my body and subconscious. Is there anything that comes to mind to help move through this process?
Absolutely. That's why some of our therapists are somatic therapists. They work with the body, because you're absolutely right. Our issues are in our tissues. And sometimes we've done, as a protective mechanism, we've stuffed the trauma down. Some people don't even know what the trauma was. That doesn't mean that they haven't been traumatized. So it'll be in our body, but it'll also be in our language. So when we cotton on to the words of reaction, I can't, I should, I'll try, but never, if only, impossible, always. If we can weed out those words or only use them with awareness, it's incredible. And we learn to change it even in mid-sentence. I can't have that conversation. You know, I choose not to have that conversation with my father. Is different from I can't have that conversation with my father. So rather than speaking out of the trauma, it's a more empowered language. Thank you for asking me, but no, I'm fully committed at present. That can be quite challenging for some people to say when they've normally said, yes, I'll be there, yes, I'll do that, yes, I can. And we may need to say, thank you for asking me, but no, I'm fully committed at present. Or thank you, I don't want to go to that event. So, you know, one of my books, Your Life Matters, has the foundation of all of this is in that book. It also comes on a double CD. So Your Life Matters, the book, is available in every library around Australia. So you may want to get that out of the library. And I'm sure you'd find it very helpful. It's very, very practical. It's not esoteric, and it's very accessible because I left school when I was 13. So I write like I talk. So it tends to make it very accessible for people. And I know that we're trying to squeeze a lot into a short time, and I don't pretend to make any of this easy. We try and make it as simple to see that we're not helpless victims of our circumstance, that we can actually heal from whatever we have experienced, and how can we learn and get educated about that so that we can begin that return journey back home to our essential self.
Well, thank you, Petrea. There's some thanks coming through on the chat message, and I did say we'd close off the questions, and we have gone 20 minutes over. So thank you for being so generous with your time. Obviously, we're just scratching the surface with a lot of these topics. As you said, topics like forgiveness, there's a whole 5-day workshop in that, and lots of tools and discussions to be had, and I'm sure different applications for different people and situations. So you've given some great ideas on your book is there, your CDs there. They can come and meet you and hear from you at the conference, of course, or of course you've got your amazing programs if people, and a smorgasbord even you called it, of educational resources that tap into. So they're all on your website, questforlife.com.au, is that correct?
That's correct.
Fantastic. So I'll drop that link in there as well for everyone. Quest for nice plug.
For those who can't get to the conference as well, I hope you can, but for those who can't, also on a Monday evening from 7:30 till 8, on most Mondays, if they go to the Facebook group, Petrea King Meditation Group, I do a live meditation every Monday night from 7:30 till 8, and we usually have a little chat about something as well, about anxiety or dealing with hopelessness, helplessness, difficult people, anger, all kinds of different subjects. So people are always very, very welcome to join us. There's about 1,400 people, and we all come together wherever we are and meditate for that half hour and have a wee bit of a chat. So that's available, and there are lots of other resources. So if you go to our web page or our Facebook page, then we're always happy to have contact from anyone in the community.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Petrea. We look forward to seeing you at the conference, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you're watching this recording, we hope you enjoy the session too. Thank you so much.
Wishing you well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.